Hi, everyone. It's Valerie Gordon from Commander in She. On today's webinar, we talked about our inner narrator and how it creates a narrative point of view that has such an impact on our story. And on May 20th, I'm going to have a masterclass 2-hour workshop of group coaching to take a deep dive into the topic. If you're interested, here's an overview of some of what we'll cover, and you'll see why it matters so much, the role that your narrator plays in your story. In all of my workshops, I talk about the power of story, and there's great science behind it. Stories can impact us and stay with us in a way that facts and data don't. They infuse information with a stickiness and help us retain it. In fact, the brain processes story like a visual and motor experience, meaning that when someone tells you a story, even if you weren't there at the time, you can almost picture it as if it's happening to you. And that content that becomes imprinted in your brain then serves as future evidence. Why is that important? Well, consider the three main story elements. We've got character. Story needs to be about someone. You are the central character of your story. Plot. Those are things that you make happen or how you react to plot points in your story and plot twists. And narrative point of view. And that's what I'm talking about. The narrative point of view is the tone or the voice of the story. So when you think about this in your own life, it's kind of that voice that's talking you through your day. So the voice in my head has something to do with this picture. Did a little bit of wordplay here, but the word I'm looking for is squash. This is squash, a picture of squash. And this is squash, a visual representation of this voice in my head of a very mean woman who, if I were to draw a picture of her, would look more like a bearded Viking with confetti in his beard. At least it's the best I could find on Pexels. This is the voice in my head that when I do something wrong or am feeling insecure or a lack of confidence, Squash, that's what I've named her, that's what she looks like, she jumps in and feeds me all sorts of garbage. Perhaps you can relate to statements like this that pop up in your head, really unhelpful thoughts. And the problem is once they're in there, we tend to recycle them over and over again. That's your inner narrator. Some people think of it as an inner critic, but the thoughts aren't always critical. And so that's why I like to think of it as an inner narrator and ask just who is narrating your story. Now, in our course on May 20th, we are going to take a deep dive into all the different types of narrators who show up. There are 10 total. I'll give you a quick overview of 4 to be aware of. The first is the unreliable narrator. Now, this is something taken straight from literature. There is such a thing in literature as the unreliable narrator. It's when the narrator of the story tells you a story, but that doesn't quite add up to what you, the reader, is experiencing. You know that that narrator has a point of view that might not be truthful. Just like we sometimes make up stories in our lives. If we go to talk to a friend and she sort of seems like she doesn't want to really talk to us, we might walk away feeling like, I wonder if she's mad at me. What did I do? When really it has nothing to do with us. That's an unreliable narrator. Second type of narrator to be aware of is the runaway narrator. Now, this I've kind of made up in my storytelling workshops, but the runaway narrator will take that storyline from the unreliable narrator and just run with it into the future. So, my gosh, my friend is mad at me. She's going to tell everybody. I don't even know what I did wrong. Now I'm not going to get invited out with the group, and I'm going to be at home alone on Friday nights and have no friends. That's your runaway narrator running with a story to a place you don't want to go. Third type of narrator to be aware of, many people struggle with this, is the overthinking or over-questioning narrator. Someone called this analysis paralysis. How do you move forward when you are constantly second-guessing yourself or worrying about things or overthinking them to the point of inaction? It's a very unhelpful narrator. And finally, there is the self-centered narrator, meaning if you picture it like a selfie, you're always in the frame so that you assume that everything that happens has something to do with you, even when it doesn't. Also can be considered a narcissistic narrator. Not always a bad thing, but can often get in your way because not everything that is going on has to do with you. So, what's the impact of the internal narrator? Well, when you think about it, that internal narrator is providing you with consistent daily narration, that voiceover in your head. And that becomes your narrative point of view that you bring to your story. You're the central character in the story. You decide on the plot points. You can make things happen, but you are guided by that narrative point of view. So if the voice in your head isn't a helpful one, it might be infusing your story with some of these things that you don't want in there. Now they're not only in your head, they're part of your action. They influence your plot. And then what happens is we look at our past experience of things that have happened to us, and we use them to make present decisions and the actions we take in the present. And then what happens is it creates a future impact, meaning we never really move our stories along because we are so stuck in our heads. We are being squashed from the potential of creating a greater next chapter. So for anyone who struggles with this, particularly for you overthinkers out there, I like this quote: maybe self-criticism isn't the problem, but rather how we react to the criticism that is the problem. I don't know that we'll ever fully get rid of that voice in our head, but when it stops us from taking action, that's when you're going to want to recast your narrator. Couple of tips on how we do that. Now, again, on the May 20th Masterclass Workshop, we're going to take a deep dive into understanding how to control, take command of, and ultimately recast that voice in your head. But I'll share a few tips with you today. The first is to just ask the question, who says it's so? When that voice speaks up in your head, identify the voice. Acknowledge that it's your unhelpful narrator, that it's picking apart and criticizing in ways, things that you would never say to someone else that you are suddenly saying to yourself. So if you spill your coffee and the first reaction in your head is, why am I always such a mess? Well, who says it so? That squash showing up, saying that you're always a mess when really we have a single circumstance here of spilling our coffee. Don't label great character flaws from small situational experiences. Fact check the source. Is it true that you are always a mess? Now, if you spill your coffee every single time you pour yourself a cup, you might want to work on some of your motor capabilities. But if it's a once in a while thing, how often is it truly happening? Again, fact check. And I would say, don't feign positivity. I know a lot of people believe in changing the voice in your head by simply saying positive things to yourself. You're a fantastic person. This makes me think of, remember this guy from Saturday Night Live when Al Franken was Stuart Smalley and he would look in the mirror and give himself positive affirmations? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. And it was funny. Now, this might work for some people. It doesn't work for me, and I suspect it doesn't work for a lot of people because your inner narrator is a bit of a skeptic, which is why I suggest rather than creating positive mantras, rather than going to pretend positivity, ask yourself these questions. So what? So what if I spilled my coffee? What is the impact? We're looking to neutralize the statement. So if you're about to do something, let's say very difficult, and your inner narrator says, that's too hard, you can't do that. The positive mantra would be, you can do anything you set your mind to. But if I'm looking at that like a skeptic, what I might rather say is a more neutral statement, which is just, I've done hard things before and I can do them again. So what if it's hard? And then we get to the second part of the question, which is the now what? What actions do I want to take? Separate the thought of that unhelpful narrator from the action you want to take. And if you truly want to recast your narrator, give consideration as to who belongs in your head. So I'd like to get rid of Squash and replace her with Squad. Wouldn't it be awesome to have these people in my head, spurring me on and giving me the confidence to turn the page to a next chapter and not get stuck in an old story?